This is Karishma Asher, Race Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello, in this episode we chat with Karishma about her role as Race Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool, and we hear about some of her recent work to coordinate the university's Race Equality Charter application. We hope you enjoy. Karishma, we're really pleased to be speaking to you today about your role as Race Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool. But before we get started, we love to hear a little bit from each of our guests about their background and how you've arrived at the role that you're in today.
Of course, yeah. So, thanks for having me, first of all. So in terms of my background, it's predominantly in student unions. So I spent a lot of time working in SU, sort of behind the scenes in student campaigning and student democracy. So a lot of this work crossed over with the liberation side of things, so working with student communities that face particular systemic barriers within higher education and in society more widely. So basically what we call EDI on the university side, it's liberation on the students' union side. So I worked with these groups of students to actually help build and sustain community networks in a way that it was led by those groups themselves. Rather than sort of relying on an external person or the institution to actually run it for them. It was very much led by them for them. And to actually support them into translating their wider goals into campaign strategies. So some campaign expertise there as well. There's a lot of training development involved. So working with elected student leaders, making sure that their sort of raw passion and lived experience as members of those groups could translate into targeted aims and wins to actually make their experience better for themselves and for other students as well, and then hopefully having that wider impact on the society that the university was part of. And also making sure it was a two-way process, so making sure that those student leaders could get tangible skills and experience out of it as well. We didn't want to rely on those students to fix the problems that their institutions created without getting anything in return. So it was to make sure that we were being led by them while it being a reciprocal process, really. So that spanned across quite a few different areas of diverse groups, and the race equality specialism that I'm now in, it kind of came out of a mix of personal experience, being a woman of colour myself, and research that I undertook and training that I undertook to actually understand the barriers that I was up against as a woman of colour. And then lending that expertise to predominantly white staff teams to make sure that our race equality work as in those student unions was authentic, and it was student-led, and it was appropriately communicated and actually delivered tangible student-led sustainable culture change. So when this role, the role of Race Equality Officer, was created and went live, it just seemed like a perfect fit. And here I am.
Fantastic. So you have been working with students, and am I right to say your role now focuses on working with staff instead, or students and staff?
So it's predominantly staff with me sitting in the academy, but the Race Equality Charter work that we undertake, it does span across the whole institution, so that includes student experience as well. So sometimes I do work with students or work with colleagues who deliver student-facing work. But yeah, the majority is staff-facing work.
That's fantastic. And has most of your experience been in the northwest of England, or have you had experience elsewhere in the country? The only reason I ask that is I'm wondering if there are specific themes that come up from working in universities in the northwest, or if the kind of themes that you work with are actually nationwide.
So yeah, predominantly in the northwest. I just prefer up north, so I stayed up north. I have sort of networked and trained alongside colleagues from universities across the country. So from southern universities, and it seems that the actual issues in the sector that relate to race seem pretty consistent across the board, and so do the initiatives and the interventions to address them. But because there's just a more diverse population in those particular larger cities in the south, I suppose looking at the raw data, it looks a bit better. So there is a particular challenge in the north in terms of the population that we're recruiting from and who we attract in these institutions. But other than that, it seems, the issues are fairly consistent across the sector.
I think what's really interesting about one of the things you've said there is around that work you were doing with campaigning. And it just seems like you're right, it is such a perfect role for you, this, isn't it? This race equality role. Because a large part of it is getting people to listen to the issues, and then obviously to contribute through the survey. So, and we'll get onto that in a little bit later on. But one of the primary objectives of your role includes coordinating the development of the university's race equality charter application. So, could you just give us a little bit of information about what that is and why it was created?
Yeah, of course. So the charter itself is a framework by Advance HE. So if you're familiar with the Athena Swan, it's sort of parallel to that, but where they focus on race rather than gender, although intersectionality, is key to what we do. So in the work that we're doing, we are looking at race and gender as an intersectional lens rather than race completely in isolation. Advance HE created the charter. I think it was 2015, I want to say that it was created, so it's a bit younger compared to Athena Swan. And we as a university signed up to the principles of the charter, so effectively committed to undertaking the work towards an application back in February 2021. We're conducting a self-reflective audit that is data-led with a lens of predominantly ethnicity. And our application will be a two-parter. So the first part is the core application itself that outlines the data summaries that we've been asked to provide. And then the second part is an action plan that actually responds to the racial inequalities that we find within that data.
So how are we going with that at the moment? What are the completions looking like at the current time? And when does that process come to an end for the next part of it?
So at the moment, we're at the sort of tail end of actually collecting the data. So Advance HE give us a framework of the data that they want us to actually consider. So on the student side of things, it's things like the continuation rates, it's the actual diversity of our student body, of our applicants, the graduate outcomes, also, all these different areas of student experience all collate together to give us a bit of a framework to work within. And on the staff side of things, it's a similar thing. So the staff body and broken down by sort of ethnicity and job type as well to see, are there inequalities at different grades, not just across the institution. Is there something there that we need to look at? A job type, contract type, that kind of thing. Looking at sort of promotion panels, looking at the way that we do things as well. So our recruitment processes, we have to comment on our promotion processes, disciplinary processes, all those things that can have a racialized impact on a member of the university community. So like I said, we're at the tail end of the data collection of that and at the analysis. So the analysis will actually look for the gaps to see where, we're doing okay versus where there is work to be done. Our subgroups, so we have 4 subgroups. One is data, so they're doing the sort of legwork on collating that data and analysing it. Thankfully, because I'm a literature graduate, so data is not one of my favourite things. Then we've got the community, visibility and staff experience subgroup. So they're looking at basically the staff side of things and staff experience, and culture and student experience, so looking at the student side of things. And those latter 2 subgroups are made up of experts in those areas. So we've got, for example, in the student subgroup, we've got colleagues representing careers, international advice and guidance, AQSD, different faculties, all sorts of areas that all contribute to a student's experience while they're at the university, and then similarly on the staff side of things as well. So those subgroups at the moment are looking at the data outcomes that we're finding and providing a narrative with the context that they are representing. So if we find, for example, particular gaps in our staff body, we are then commenting on that from a recruitment lens or from an HR lens. And similarly in terms of career progression, for example, we'll look at that from the development opportunities that we offer, the training that we offer, to actually see where it is that we could be improving that. And to provide a rundown of what we do at the moment as well. So the application, it's not for us to say it's not for us to try and fix everything before we submit. That's absolutely not the point. It's purely to give a really clear, detailed picture of where we are now, and then to talk about what we're going to do about it. So we're almost at the end of the analysis stage, and then the next stage from around February onwards will be the actual drafting and approval process and consultation process of the application and action plan. So that's going to be really fun for me when I get to write 14,000 words on us as an institution. But we are, we're on track with that. And Matt, you mentioned the survey as well. So part of the mandatory part of the process is to conduct a university-wide survey with questions provided by Advanced HE, because data only tells us so much. We can look at the numbers, we can try and fill in the gaps from the expertise that we have, but then we also want to hear from staff and students themselves about what they feel the issues are, what their experiences are. Is there anything that we're spotting in the trends that we need to target that the data isn't telling us in isolation? So we ran that survey back in May. We got a really excellent response. I think it was over 3,000 respondents, which is just really, really excellent. We were really pleased with that. And that's shown us some key themes that we need to look into in more depth. So one of the major principles underlying the Charter is that what we probably call BAME staff and students, it's not a homogenous group. The issues I face as a South Asian woman are very different to someone who is Black might face, or someone who is Chinese might face. So it's about taking a really nuanced approach to each ethnic group rather than assuming that one solution will work for everybody. So one of the things we do as standard is disaggregating the data that we have wherever we have enough sort of people to anonymize the groups. So I think we're looking at 10 or more per sort of group at a particular level, just to make sure we're protecting anonymity. We then disaggregate as far as possible to see what's happening across the different ethnic groups rather than just who's white versus who isn't. And that's really come through really, really strongly in the survey. It's, when we looked at just BAME versus white respondents, there were some areas where there were no gaps at all. But then when you disaggregated that, you could see, because some groups were particularly positive about some of the areas that we asked about, that boosted the average up so high that it was disguising really, really concerning responses from other ethnic groups. So that survey has just really, really helped us round out that data collection and analysis to understand exactly what's going on. So we're also running focus groups at the moment with those groups that we've identified that need a bit more exploration in terms of what's going on and what the ideal picture looks like. Those are running at the moment to help us just fully round out that investigative process. And then we'll pull all of that together to see what our picture actually looks like. And then the next step, as I said, we'll be refining it into the application. I have a feeling that 14,000 words will not be enough, because it never is, but that's part of the fun. And then we'll go into consultation with the aim to submit in July.
Fantastic. That sounds so interesting in terms of the analysis that's going to have to take place around, as you say, those different ethnic groups, and then pulling it all together into your application. And then, as you say, that goes in July. Mm-hmm. Did you say July? Yep, fantastic. So that will go in July, and then hopefully we'll get the outcome, I'm guessing, in a couple of months after that. Is that correct?
Yes. So the panel's basically made up of peers from other institutions. So rather than it being the team at Advanced HE, analysing each application, it is a peer-led review process. So I think because I'm a panelist myself, actually, so I'm part of that review process for other institutions. I think what we're told is up to 12 weeks to give the panel enough time to have a look, because you can imagine it's quite a big pack we're ending in. There may be some revisions as well. So, we might be asked to just tweak a couple of bits where we're on the border of being awarded. We just need to refine what we sent in. So that might be a possibility. And then we'll get the final outcome, I think, up to 12 weeks after submission.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. And then hopefully we'll be successful after that panel, or maybe a subsequent panel after that. Yeah. But what's your plan to then, once that's been achieved, once the charter's been achieved, to roll it out across the institution? What kind of impact do you hope that will have?
So in terms of the rollout, the Charter Award actually lasts for up to 5 years. So it's not a case of, once we get it, that's it, we fixed racism. That's not That's not what it says, and it just recognizes that we are on the right path to addressing the racial inequalities that we find, and we've done so in an appropriate way, a detailed way, and one that is authentic with tangible solutions that we've proposed. So part of the consultation process for the action plan in particular will be ensuring that each action that we put forward is allocated to the right person or right team, so that we can make sure that we are accountable for every single action that we put forward. And each of those actions also needs to be SMART, so it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, the campaigner's dream, basically. So if anyone's listening and thinks raising awareness is a campaign goal, it isn't, and I could talk about that for hours, but I'll leave that one there. So all of our actions need to be SMART, they need to be accounted for in terms of who will actually be doing them, and then the rollout will be actually putting that into action. So because the sort of measurement element of it is embedded into how we design that action, there is that ongoing monitoring of almost tracking the progress of that mini project as it goes on. So it basically then falls to a bit of an ongoing project management thing of just all the different areas. But then, as I mentioned, with the award being valid for 5 years, we will then start this whole process again to renew or to move on to silver in about 5 years' time after our first application. So we will then have a proper look back at the data to see, what is in those core data sets that we have to provide, can we see any major differences that we set out to achieve? In the actual actions themselves, when we look back at them, can we see if we've achieved them or made progress towards them, or can we see what went wrong so that we can adjust that and do it again? So in terms of the impact that I'm hoping to achieve, I suppose it's a bit of a twofold one. For our staff and students of ethnic minority backgrounds, it's having that really sustainable, pragmatic culture change where they can come to work or they can come to university and they can, our staff can all progress in their careers without being up against racialized barriers. Our staff don't have to work twice as hard to overcome racialized barriers when they are fully capable of being promoted. I think we like to think we live in a meritocracy, but merit is part of it, and then there's the privileges that come with certain characteristics. So, one of the impacts I really like to see is systems and processes that try to aim for the meritocracy that we actually think that we live in. On the student side of things, it's students that are able to come and demonstrate their full capabilities without, again, having to work twice as hard to overcome things that don't actually matter in terms of their academic performance, but for some reason do. They can see themselves reflected in their course content. They can see themselves reflected in their institution and in the academic makeup as well that we have, and just getting that really strong feeling of belonging. So that's some of the sort of wider impacts I'm hoping for. I suppose in a really sort of long term and quite a big picture, dreamy sense, we have a massive impact on the society that we're in. We're part of a massive city. We engage with it on a day-to-day basis with different communities. Our graduates go out and impact almost every facet of society through the sectors that they work in. And it sets us up in this really incredible opportunity to have a really positive impact on our society as a whole. So to be able to see the work that we do now sort of play out in the long term over the coming 10, 20 years, because we've equipped all of our staff and students to be part of a global university and part of a multicultural society, that would be quite an amazing thing to see, I think.
Wow. I mean, you're on the verge of solving racism now, just what you just said you can't do.
But then I won't be employed, Matt.
No, that's true. That's true. I think it's very interesting, actually. It reminds me of my time in a local authority, which there was lots of conversations happening around the need for the staff body to represent the local community. And that in Stoke-on-Trent meant that finding those South Asian staff groups and trying to increase those numbers, really. And to be honest with you, I don't remember. I remember pockets of positive action, but not the type of systematic approach where we're really understanding the staff group, the student body, like we're doing here, and then finding and doing actions and creating an action plan around how to tackle some of those issues. So it seems like the conversations moved on since my time in local government, who were just sort of grappling with it, and they couldn't really get to grips with it. It seems like universities maybe are pushing ahead, as they should be, in this area. I know another aspect of your role is to identify and promote best practice in race equality through obvious knowledge sharing, developing and delivering training. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that part of your role?
Of course, yeah. So, like I mentioned, I do network with other race equality leads or rec leads across the sector. So, it's always a really excellent way to see what other institutions are doing, see what already works, or what barriers they've come up against, so that we can sort of see, are we seeing something similar? So I know, for example, at the start of our rec journey, we were finding our feet quite a bit. And we reached out to, I think, Kingston University, who were on their, I think, silver application. And their rec leads did a session with us to talk about their experiences. And it was really sort of validating and just really encouraging to know that the difficulties we were experiencing were a totally normal part of the rec process, and we are embarking on a massive piece of culture change. So of course we were going to find the issues that we found. So it wasn't that we weren't on the wrong path. We were just finding the difficulties that are naturally going to occur. So I think part of that does come from the networking, from I guess being a little bit vulnerable and asking for guidance and insight and tips, which I think we could all just be better at as universities. We're also sort of obsessed with being sector leading, or at the very least being on par with each other, that it turns into a competition rather than a shared arena of knowledge sharing, which is what it should be. So the other side of it, in terms of the training and the resources, again, that some of that comes from seeing what other institutions do and what's worked well for their staff bodies. Some of it is staff led. So, I do get a lot of requests for training, either in departments or just suggestions of training that people would like to see. With this role of race equality officer being new and only having brought in last summer, it's a whole new portfolio that we are still building. And so it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of develop it in line with demand and need, rather than just sort of putting something out and then seeing what happens. So a lot of the training that I do is based on what staff have told me they want to see. And it's taking that sort of race equality theory that's just kind of bubbling in my brain all the time, and kind of translating that into a bit of a sort of long-term strand that staff can engage with. Because it takes a lot of learning. It takes a lot of sort of reflection and research to sort of understand the really fine nuances. And I think one of the things that is often said just generally in culture, not necessarily to me specifically, is you see on Twitter a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's always about race" or something like that. And I think once you have your head in it on a day-to-day basis, of course it's about race, because you are you can spot it a mile off. So it's just building that understanding of and I guess a kind of sensitivity, so that you can spot those issues arising and then learn how to tackle them, how you can maybe prevent them or adapt to them in your work streams. So that's where the training side comes in. That's kind of my aim then.
I think that's great that we've created this new post that you now occupy, which is fab, since the summer, which has got this element of knowledge sharing, developing and delivering training. And I think lots of colleagues want to tackle this issue of racism. They just aren't equipped to do it. So it's great that that's a key part of your role. I was recently contacted by an academic who wanted some advice on how to confront inappropriate conversations in the classroom, specifically in regard to race. So can you give us some advice on that? What can colleagues from white backgrounds do to help if they witness conversations or behaviours that are inappropriate?
Of course, yeah. So I think some of that comes back to building your own understanding of how racism can manifest, so that you are able to spot those conversations ideally as early on as possible, for example, because we know that racism isn't just those racist incidents or slurs of violence. It is also really covert behaviours, and that's how it's persisted for as long as it has. So I suppose it kind of boils down to if, for example, it's something happening to someone or within a space where someone from an ethnic minority background or from any other sort of underrepresented background that could be affected by a similar situation, if they're present and it's happening to them, it's where the principles of bystander intervention really come in. So obviously bystander intervention itself could be a whole session, it could be like a half-day training session, which would be the dream. But the crux of it is, 4 potential methods that you could adopt to tackle the situation in front of you. And the one that you use will change. It will change with every situation. It will change with your own comfort level as well. There's no right answer. It's just what feels right to you in that time. So you might directly intervene by intervening in the conversation or the dynamic to actually challenge what's happening. Or you might want to take a bit more of a deflective approach. So step in to change the subject or steer it away, or even just get that person out of the situation. So if, for example, there's an uncomfortable conversation happening in an office, you could poke your head and say, oh, someone's on the phone for you, and get that person out of the room to interrupt and move the situation away. You could delegate. So if you're not really in a position to help, or you're not able to, or you just really, really don't feel comfortable, you can ask someone else to sort of step in and take on one of those approaches instead. Or if you're really not sure, or it just feels like this is the most appropriate way forward, you can also delay. So you can check in on the person afterwards and sort of say, notice this happened. Are you okay? Is there anything that you need? What can I do? It might also just be that actually it was all fine. So, as I've mentioned before, I sometimes do crack jokes so that I can get through the day while tackling racism for, my 9 to 5. So someone who's not quite as used to my humor might sort of step in and sort of say, you're right. And I'm just, it would be me going, yeah, that's just me making a slightly inappropriate joke. But you can always just check in afterwards, just make sure that that person's okay. And see if there's anything that they want you to do. So it might be that actually you can put in a log of the incident on report and support, for example, as a witness of it, and you can support them in doing the same as someone who's experienced it. If it's something that's in private, or if it's in a room where it may appear that there isn't anyone about who would be affected by that conversation or by that action, but it still just doesn't sit right that it's happening, or what you're hearing just isn't what really should be said in any situation, you can still call it out, and I think it's still really, really important to do that, even if no one is there to be directly affected by it, because either in both that situation and a situation where someone who is affected by it, it's really important to get across that behaviour just isn't acceptable, and some of that for me just comes back to campaigning theory in general. It's about achieving behaviour change. One of the main ways of doing that is to show that behaviour that you are trying to change is no longer socially acceptable, and the behaviour that you're trying to move towards is what is socially acceptable. It is what the majority are doing. So whether someone's there or whether it's just something you've overheard, but it's still just not really what we want in our university, it's a case of just saying, actually, that's not okay. That's not funny. That's quite inappropriate. If you feel up to it, explain why. Yeah, just call it out.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. We've also got Jill Scott coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and she's going to be talking to us specifically about that kind of being a proactive bystander. But everything you've said really resonates with some of the work that she's been doing as well. And it's just so important, isn't it, that we acknowledge what's going on, and we do tackle it in an appropriate way, but we don't just let things go, because I think you said something around how that's not how we want our university to be. And that's exactly the point, isn't it, is we have to change the culture. It's so important.
Yeah, so I suppose if you're concerned about saying the wrong thing, if it's that you've witnessed something, or you want to try and approach someone to see if they're okay, it is a really, really valid concern. It's a totally valid thing to be worried about. And ultimately, we're all just trying to build a more inclusive environment and not make things worse. I just really stress that 9 times out of 10, not doing or saying anything is probably worse than saying the wrong thing. As long as you're open to the feedback and you're open to being led by the person who is in front of you and taking any direction that they give you, you're on the right path. Everyone makes mistakes. I've made mistakes and I will continue to make mistakes, because being anti-racist is about your continuous practice. It's not about being not racist, which is a one-off state or condition. It is about continuously striving for that. So making mistakes is part and parcel of the process, as it is with any kind of journey that you go on, or any kind of learning that you go on. Feeling a bit silly for 5 minutes, I can promise you, is much better than being alone in experiencing racial discrimination. So just try your best and give yourself the space to reflect if you do get it wrong, and then pick yourself back up and start again.
Brilliant, Karishma. I think you've given us so much good advice in this conversation already, and now we've got to the last question, and I'm going to ask you what we ask every guest, which is we always like to finish with 3 or 4 take-home tips for the listeners to reflect on in terms of their practice. You've given us so many already, but if you've got anything that we can boil down in terms of things that they can go away and take in part of their practice, what would they be?
I think the first one would be to diversify what you engage with. So I think we always see anything to do with race equality is to do with tackling racism, which is absolutely valid and true. But I think in a truly racially equal society and culture, it's one where cultural diversity is celebrated, and that includes art and fiction and music and all of the joyful creative things also being celebrated. And actually it gives us a really, really rich insight into perspectives that are different to our own. So as a literature graduate, I'd definitely say read more books by authors of minority ethnic backgrounds. Watch Netflix shows or listen to podcasts by different creators, just to help expand just your own perspectives of what life is. The second would be to definitely just keep the learning going. The more that you understand the nuances of how racial inequalities manifest, especially in higher education and in the UK, the easier it becomes to spot them and tackle them before they get even bigger and get more out of control. And I suppose the last one will be just going back to what I said about anti-racism versus not being racist. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Approach the whole spectrum of the topic with curiosity and by seeing it as an opportunity to develop yourself and develop a better society for those around you, instead of approaching it with fear, because I think the minute you bring fear into it, you go into self-preservation mode, and it's difficult to take those big steps that we need to create the change that we need to see. Diversify what you consume. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, that they're the best way to learn, and approach with curiosity rather than fear.
Brilliant. That was really, really interesting. Thanks for your time today, Karishma.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was a really interesting discussion with Karishma. She detailed the work that's underway at the moment in terms of our application for the Race Equality Charter. I think it's really interesting that she made it clear that the application is not about glossing over issues or detailing that everything's fixed now, but showing where the university is at and detailing a clear action plan to address key issues.
Yeah, and she also made it clear that the understanding where we are at the moment is incredibly important. It was so interesting what she said in terms of how it is so important to understand how key issues impact different ethnic groups in different ways. And we can't just have one response for all non-white people. The response needs to be far more nuanced than that.
Well, there's lots within that podcast for us to think about and reflect on. If you'd like to take your thinking further, we've added some resources to the website on a specific podcast reading list, which you can access at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy liveuni.ac.uk/podcast. Also, we'd love to hear what you thought about the episode, so please do tweet us at Live Uni Academy, and you can also find us at eLearnerMatt or at Alexandra_Owen on Twitter.
And we are really grateful for those who have taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. So if you haven't done so already, please do take the time to review our show, or even better, simply share the episode with friends and colleagues on your social media. Bye for now.